Her couture gown felt like a gilded cage, the diamonds around her neck a beautiful glittering leash. Isabella Vance stood on the most famous red carpet in New York, a radiant, pregnant goddess to the world. But the smile on her husband's face was a mask, and the words he whispered in her ear were pure venom. In front of 100 flashing cameras, he would not just break her heart. He would shatter her dignity, leaving her alone and humiliated under the cruel glare of the spotlight. He thought he was pushing aside nobody. He had no idea he was about to unleash a storm. For Isabella wasn't just his pregnant wife. She was the hidden secret of the most powerful man in the city, and her father was about to change the world to get his daughter back. The air in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was thick with an artificial lemon-scented chill that did nothing to cool the tension. Isabella Vance rested a protective hand on the gentle swell of her 6-month pregnancy bump, the silk of her custom seraphine gown cool against her skin. Beside her, her husband, Elliot Vance, was a portrait of predatory calm. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the glittering Manhattan skyline as their car inched through traffic towards the annual Phoenix Charity Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. To the outside world, they were the golden couple. Elliot Vance, the charismatic real estate mogul whose star was on a meteoric rise, and his beautiful soft-spoken wife, Isabella. Their life was a curated collection of magazine covers, charity boards, and envious whispers. But inside the soundproofed luxury of their car, the reality was a cold, desolate landscape. Isabella. "For God's sake, sit up straight," Elliot murmured, not even glancing at her. His voice was a low, perfectly modulated critique. "You're slouching. It makes the dress look cheap, and it accentuates your condition." Isabella's hand tightened on her belly. "I'm pregnant, Elliot. My back hurts." "Excuses." He sighed, finally turning to her. His eyes the color of a winter sky raked over her. "I paid a fortune for that dress. The least you can do is wear it properly. And the necklace, is it fastened correctly? It looks slightly off-center." She reached up her fingers, fumbling with the clasp of the Riviera diamond necklace he had gifted her. It felt less like a gift and more like a set of shackles. "It's fine, Elliot." "It's not fine," he snapped, his voice dropping to the dangerous whisper she knew so well. "Nothing is ever just fine with you, is it? It's always good enough." "We are not good enough people, Isabella. We are exceptional. Or rather, I am. You are merely a reflection of me. Tonight, that reflection needs to be flawless." Isabella bit her lip to stop the tremor. This was their ritual before every public event. The systematic dismantling of her confidence piece by piece until she was nothing more than a beautiful, compliant doll on his arm, too nervous to say or do anything that might detract from his spotlight. She had met Elliot 2 years ago, a whirlwind romance that swept her off her feet. He was charming, ambitious, and utterly intoxicating. She, a quiet art history graduate working at a small gallery, was dazzled. Her father had warned her. Arthur, a man of few words and even fewer social graces, had taken an instant dislike to Elliot. He was a self-made logistics consultant, comfortable but not fabulously wealthy, and fiercely protective of his only daughter since her mother's death years ago. "He's a peacock," Bella Arthur had said, his voice gruff over the phone from his quiet home in upstate New York. "All flash and no substance. A man who needs to be seen that badly is hiding something ugly." Isabella had dismissed it as a father's overprotectiveness. She was in love. Now trapped in this loveless, gilded cage, Her father's words echoed in her mind like a prophecy. Elliot's ambition wasn't just a driving force, it was a consuming fire, and he was more than willing to use her as kindling. He had slowly, methodically isolated her from her old friends, and even from her father, complaining about the long drive and Arthur's provincial attitude. The car finally pulled up to the curb. The roar of the crowd and the blinding supernova of camera flashes instantly filled the space. An attendant in a crisp uniform opened Elliot's door. He slid out a practiced $1 million smile, instantly materializing on his face. He extended a hand back into the car, not for her, but for the cameras. It was a gesture of performative chivalry. As she took his hand and emerged from the car, the flashes intensified. She could hear the reporters shouting their names. Elliot, Mr. Vance over here. Isabella, you look stunning. For a moment, bathed in the artificial daylight, she felt a surge of hope. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe the magic of the evening, the joy of their coming child, would soften him. Elliot leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear. His smile didn't waver as he whispered, "Remember what I told you. Smile, nod, and don't speak unless you're spoken to. Your opinions are not what they're here for." The hope died as quickly as it had come. The diamonds around her neck felt impossibly heavy. He led her onto the red carpet, his hand a firm, proprietary grip on the small of her back. She was his accessory, his beautifully pregnant prop, and tonight she was about to serve her purpose. The red carpet was a river of crimson and gold flowing towards the grand floodlit entrance of the Met. It was a battlefield of couture influence and ego. Every step was a pose, every glance a calculation. Isabella had learned to navigate it, to hold her smile, even when her feet ached and her spirit withered. But tonight, the air was different. There was a charge of anticipation that felt sharper, more malevolent. As they paused for the main bank of photographers, Elliot tightened his grip on her. "Angle yourself slightly to the left, Isabella." "It's your better side," he commanded in a low tone. She complied, the flashbulbs bursting in her eyes like tiny explosions. It was in that moment of blinding light that she saw her. Stepping out of a sleek black Maserati just behind their Rolls-Royce was Chloe Decker. Chloe was the latest it girl, a fiery, ambitious actress who had landed a leading role in a blockbuster film produced by a company Elliot had recently invested in. She was everything Isabella wasn't: bold, overtly sensual, and dripping with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She was also the woman whose perfume had been clinging to Elliot's suits for the past 3 months. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. She had suspected, of course. The late nights he claimed were investor meetings, the hushed phone calls he took in his study, the sudden uncharacteristic gifts that felt more like bribes for her silence. She had tried to ask him about it once, and he had turned it back on her with chilling precision. "Are you accusing me of something, Isabella? Is this your pregnancy making you paranoid and hysterical? I'm out there building an empire for us, for our child, and you're at home letting your imagination run wild. Be grateful, not suspicious." He had made her feel small and foolish. Now seeing Chloe Decker in the flesh, stepping onto the same red carpet, a stunning vision in a scandalous, backless emerald gown, Isabella knew her suspicions hadn't been paranoia. They had been an understatement. Chloe's eyes locked with Elliot's over Isabella's shoulder. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a planned detonation. Elliot gave Isabella a gentle but firm push forward, moving them along the press line. "Keep moving," he whispered, his voice dangerously smooth. They were intercepted by Amelia Vance, a notorious gossip columnist for the New York Spectator. Her smile was as sharp as her pen. Elliot, Isabella. The couple of the hour. Isabella, pregnancy suits you. You are absolutely glowing. Before Isabella could offer a polite thank you, Elliot laughed. It was a loud, dismissive sound that drew the attention of everyone nearby. "She's certainly glowing, Amelia," he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "It's amazing what a few extra pounds can do. I keep telling her we'll need to hire a team of the world's best trainers to get her back into a respectable shape after the baby arrives. A Vance must always look the part after all." The comment landed like a physical blow. The air crackled. Amelia's eyes widened, sensing a major story. The reporters and photographers began to surge closer, their microphones like a forest of black stems. Isabella's face burned with humiliation. He had never been so openly cruel before. She tried to pull her arm from his, but his grip was iron. "Elliot, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. He ignored her. Just then, Chloe Decker glided up to them, her scent jasmine and something musky enveloping them. "Elliot, darling," she purred, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, right next to Isabella's. "I was hoping I'd see you." Elliot's smile widened. He turned his body slightly, creating a space for Chloe that subtly but deliberately excluded his own wife. "Chloe, you look magnificent, a true star. And you, Isabella." Chloe said, her gaze sweeping over Isabella's pregnant form with a look of pitying disdain. "How domestic of you. It's brave to come out in your condition." The world began to spin. The flashing lights, the murmur of the crowd, the cloying scent of Chloe's perfume. It was all becoming a dizzying, nauseating vortex. Elliot was preening under the attention, soaking it in. This was his plan. This was the public execution of their marriage. He was trading up, and he wanted the world to witness the exact moment he discarded his old model for the new one. Amelia Vance's microphone was right there. "Elliot, you and Miss Decker certainly seem close. Is this a business relationship?" Elliot let out another booming laugh. He released Isabella's arm and draped his own over Chloe's bare shoulders. The cameras went into a frenzy. The image would be on every website within minutes. Elliot Vance, with his arm around his mistress, while his pregnant wife stood forgotten beside them. "Chloe is a visionary talent," Elliot announced, his voice projecting for every recording device. "In my business, you have to align yourself with the future. You can't be held back by outdated assets." He didn't look at Isabella, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Outdated asset. The words echoed in the cavern of her shock. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. They were watching her fall apart. She took a step back, then another. No one noticed. All eyes were on Elliot and Chloe, the new power couple laughing and posing for the ravenous press. She was invisible, a ghost at her own execution. With a strangled sob caught in her throat, Isabella turned and fled. She pushed her way through the gawking onlookers, ignoring the startled calls of a few reporters who finally noticed her departure. She stumbled off the red carpet, her heels sinking into the grass of the park. All she wanted was to disappear. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking so violently she could barely dial the number. There was only one person in the world she could call. The phone rang twice before he picked up. His voice was gravelly calm. "Bella." "What's wrong, Dad?" She choked out, the tears finally breaking free, hot and shameful down her cheeks. Can you please come get me? Something terrible has happened." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and in that silence, Isabella could feel a lifetime of quiet paternal fury beginning to coalesce. "Where are you, Bella?" Arthur Sinclair's voice was dangerously low. "Tell me exactly where you are." Arthur Sinclair was not a man given to overt displays of emotion. His world was one of quiet control of calculated moves and unspoken power. He lived in a sprawling but understated stone house in North Salem, a world away from the flash and clamor of Manhattan. He preferred the company of his thoroughbred horses and his dog, a retired greyhound named Odin, to the sycophants and sharks of the business world. He had built his empire, Sinclair Global, from a single shipping truck into a multi-billion-dollar logistics behemoth by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than anyone else. And then 10 years ago, he had seemingly vanished, handing over day-to-day operations to a trusted board and becoming one of the world's most elusive billionaires. The world knew the name Sinclair Global. They did not know the name Arthur Sinclair. He had scrubbed his presence from the public record with the same brutal efficiency he applied to a hostile takeover. He did it for one reason: to protect Isabella. After his wife Elena had been killed in a car accident, that Arthur always suspected was a targeted attack by a business rival he had vowed to keep his daughter out of the crosshairs of his wealth. She grew up with comfort, but not extravagance. She went to good schools, but not the elite academies of the super-rich. She knew her father was successful, but she had no concept of the scale. She thought he was a simple logistics consultant. It was a lie born of love and fear. When he gave Isabella a generous but not outlandish trust fund for her wedding to Elliot, he'd also conducted the most thorough background check money could buy. He discovered Elliot Vance wasn't a real estate mogul. He was a fraud. His company Vance Properties was a house of cards, propped up by high-interest loans and a series of brilliant lies. Most damningly, a significant portion of his seed money had been secretly funneled from a shell corporation owned by Sinclair Global, a honeypot Arthur had set up to test his prospective son-in-law. Elliot had not only taken the bait, he had leveraged it to the hilt, believing it was an anonymous investment from a foreign fund. He was, in essence, entirely funded by the man he mocked as provincial. Arthur had kept this information to himself, hoping Isabella would see the truth on her own. He had waited. Now that wait was over. The moment he heard Isabella's broken voice on the phone, the cold, controlled dam Arthur had built around his heart for decades cracked. The fury that poured forth was a silent, glacial force. "Stay where you are, Bella. Don't move. I'm sending a car," he said, his voice a low growl. "And I'm coming myself." He hung up and pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Marcus," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Scramble the chopper. Destination Manhattan, now. And get me a live feed of the Phoenix Gala red carpet. I want to see everything." Within minutes, the sitting room of his quiet country home was transformed into a command center. A massive screen on the wall flickered to life, showing live footage from a news feed. He saw it all. He saw his daughter, beautiful and pregnant, standing alone. He saw Elliot Vance, his arm draped around that actress like a cheap trophy. He saw the whispers, the stares, the smug triumph on Elliot's face. He watched the footage of his daughter fleeing, and something inside him turned to ice. His head of security, a formidable ex-Mossad agent named Marcus, stood by silently. "So the car for Ms. Vance is 5 minutes out. The helicopter is on the pad." Arthur didn't take his eyes off the screen. Elliot was now inside the gala, laughing with a group of men, Chloe Decker clinging to his arm. He looked like the king of the world. "Reroute my car." Arthur said, his voice flat. "I'm not going to the pickup point. I'm going to the gala." Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Sir, your security protocol is suspended." Arthur cut him off. "Get me David Brown on the line." David Brown was the CEO of Sinclair Global, the public face of the company. He was also on the board of the museum hosting the gala. A few moments later, Brown's voice, flustered, came through the speaker. "Arthur, is everything all right? I'm at the event now." David Arthur said, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "You are going to walk over to the event coordinator. You are going to tell them that in 10 minutes I will be taking the stage. They will interrupt the current speaker, and they will hand me a microphone. There is no room for discussion. Is that understood?" There was a stunned silence on the other end. David Brown knew that Arthur Sinclair hadn't made a public appearance in over a decade. For him to do so now unannounced at the most high-profile event of the year, something seismic was happening. "Yes, Arthur." "Understood." Arthur stood up, shrugging on a simple, dark, tailored jacket over his cashmere sweater. He looked out of place for a black tie event, but he knew that in a few minutes no one would care what he was wearing. He walked out of the room without a backward glance. Odin the greyhound rising silently to follow him to the door. As he strode toward the waiting helicopter, the rhythmic thumping of the blades beating against the night air. He wasn't just a father coming to rescue his daughter. He was an emperor marching to war. Elliot Vance had built his pathetic little kingdom on sand, using Arthur Sinclair's money, and breaking his daughter's heart in the process. Arthur was about to unleash the ocean. The Grand Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a symphony of clinking champagne glasses, polite laughter, and the self-congratulatory hum of the city's elite. A senator was at the podium droning on about philanthropic duty. Elliot Vance was in his element, holding court near the main bar. He had Chloe on one arm and a glass of vintage Dom Perignon in his hand. He felt untouchable. Isabella's tearful departure had been a minor, messy detail, easily spun into a narrative of an overly emotional pregnant woman having a moment. He was already crafting the story for the press. He was in the middle of a self-aggrandizing anecdote when a subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. The senator at the podium faltered, looking confusedly towards the side of the stage. A man in a tuxedo, the event organizer, was speaking urgently to him. The senator nodded, looking bewildered, and stepped away from the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the organizer said, his voice strained, "we have an unscheduled addition to our program. Please welcome Mr. Arthur Sinclair." The name hung in the air, met with a collective, confused silence. Sinclair. A few people in the finance and industrial sectors exchanged baffled looks. The Arthur Sinclair. The ghost. The myth. It had to be a mistake. Then he walked onto the stage. He was not what they expected. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was dressed in dark trousers, a simple sweater, and a jacket. He looked more like a university professor than a titan of industry. But there was an aura around him, an absolute, unshakable gravity that commanded the attention of every person in the room. The hall fell utterly silent. Elliot Vance froze his glass halfway to his lips. He squinted at the stage. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. He'd heard Isabella mention her father's name was Arthur, but her dad was some small-time logistics guy from upstate. This couldn't be him. On stage, Arthur approached the microphone. He didn't tap it or adjust it. He simply stood there, his piercing blue eyes, scanning the crowd of stunned faces until they found what they were looking for. They locked onto Elliot. "My name is Arthur Sinclair." He began his voice, calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. There was no tremor, no anger, just the sword-hard weight of immense power. For those of you who don't know me, I am the founder and sole owner of Sinclair Global. A wave of gasps and frantic whispers rippled through the audience. Sinclair Global was a leviathan. It owned ports, airlines, and a web of subsidiaries so vast that nearly every person in that room had been indirectly touched by its influence. The man on the stage wasn't just a billionaire. He was a kingmaker, a shadow power of mythical proportions. Elliot's blood ran cold. Sinclair, Isabella's maiden name. It couldn't be. It was an impossible, absurd coincidence. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots, but all he could feel was a rising tide of panic. Arthur's gaze remained fixed on him. "I am not a man for public events. I am here tonight for one reason. My daughter was publicly humiliated on the steps of this museum less than an hour ago. By her husband." The whispers exploded into a roar. Every head in the room swiveled to find Elliot, whose face had gone chalk white. Chloe Decker took an instinctive step away from him, her own expression a mask of horror and confusion. My daughter Arthur continued his voice, cutting through the noise like a razor, is Isabella Vance. Formerly, Isabella Sinclair. The world tilted on its axis for Elliot Vance. The room began to spin. Isabella, her quiet, unassuming father, was Arthur Sinclair. The anonymous investor, the source of all his capital, the foundation of his entire fraudulent empire, was the man he'd been mocking for 2 years. "It has come to my attention," Arthur said, his voice dropping slightly, making the chilling words even more impactful, that Mr. Vance has been telling people he is building an empire. A commendable ambition. However, it's important to give credit where it's due. Vance Properties was funded, and is for all intents and purposes owned by a series of shell corporations that report directly to me. Elliot Vance doesn't own an empire. He has been managing a small experimental department of my company. And tonight, his position has been terminated. The collective gasp was sharp and visceral. It was a public execution more brutal and complete than anything Elliot could have ever conceived. He was not just a philanderer. He was a fraud, a puppet whose strings had just been publicly severed. Chloe Decker didn't just step away. She practically recoiled from him as if he were radioactive. The men who had been laughing at his jokes moments before now stared at him with contempt. He was a pariah. But Arthur Sinclair wasn't finished. He let the revelation sink in, letting Elliot drown in the silent judgment of his peers. Then he delivered the final world-altering blow. "I have spent years in the shadows to protect my daughter from the burdens and dangers of my wealth. Tonight, I see that I was wrong. The greatest danger to her was not my fortune, but a man who sought to exploit her without it. That ends now." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the room, a king addressing his court. "Effective immediately, I am restructuring the primary trust of Sinclair Global. I have one child and one heir. As of this moment, 100% of my controlling shares and personal assets will be transferred to her name. Isabella Sinclair is now the majority shareholder and sole heir to the Sinclair Global fortune. Any man, woman, or corporation in this room who wishes to do business with my organization in the future would do well to remember who they are truly dealing with. He set the microphone down. He didn't wait for applause. He simply turned and walked off the stage, leaving behind a scene of absolute pandemonium. Elliot Vance stood frozen, his champagne glass slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The sound was lost in the cacophony. He had tried to discard his outdated asset, and in one single devastating speech, her father had made Isabella Vance arguably the most powerful woman in the room, if not the entire city. And he, Elliot Vance, was less than nothing. The morning after the Phoenix Gala was a media apocalypse. Every major news outlet, from the Wall Street Journal to the trashiest online tabloids, led with the same story. Photos of Arthur Sinclair on stage were juxtaposed with the images of Elliot and Chloe on the red carpet, and the heartbreaking shot of a lone, pregnant Isabella fleeing the scene. Headlines screamed, "The ghost billionaire returns. Heir-raising jilted wife inherits $50 empire. From humiliation to head of the table, the Isabella Sinclair story." For Elliot Vance, the fallout was immediate and catastrophic. His phone rang incessantly, with calls from panicked investors, furious lenders, and his now ex-lawyers. By 9 a.m., a letter from Sinclair Global's legal team was delivered to his office, informing him that his access to all company accounts was frozen, and an army of forensic accountants was being dispatched to audit every penny he had ever touched. He was locked out of his office by building security. When he tried to call Chloe Decker, her number was disconnected. She had vanished, her budding career likely incinerated in the blast radius of his downfall. He was ruined utterly and completely in less than 12 hours. Meanwhile, Isabella was ensconced in the quiet, fortress-like security of her father's estate. She had woken up in her childhood bedroom, the morning sun streaming through windows that overlooked rolling green hills, a stark contrast to the concrete canyons of her married life. The world she woke up to was not the one she had fallen asleep in. Her phone was a constant buzz of messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, all offering belated congratulations and sycophantic support. She ignored them all. She found her father in his study, a cavernous room lined with books, staring at a small framed photograph on his desk. It was of her mother, Eleanor, a beautiful woman with a vibrant smile and eyes the same warm brown as Isabella's. "I'm sorry," Isabella said softly, her voice still raw. "I should have listened to you." Arthur turned, his expression unreadable. "No, Isabella. I am the one who is sorry. I failed you. You didn't fail me. You saved me. I saved you from a fire I helped set." He said, his voice heavy with a guilt she had never heard before. He gestured for her to sit in one of the plush leather armchairs. "There's something you need to know. The reason I hid everything from you. The reason we lived so quietly." He took a deep breath. "Your mother. Her death wasn't a simple car accident. It was a message. I was in the middle of a brutal, hostile takeover of a rival company. The CEO was a dangerous man named Julian Croft. He played dirty. A week before the final shareholder vote, Elena's car was run off the road by a truck. The police ruled it an accident, a faulty brake line. But I knew. My security team found evidence the line had been cut. There was nothing I could prove in court, but I knew Croft was behind it. He was sending a message my family was a target. Isabella stared at him, her heart aching. She had mourned her mother her entire life, but she had always believed it was a tragic, random event. After she died, Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion. I won the takeover. I crushed Croft's company and ruined him personally. But it was a hollow victory. I looked at you so small and innocent, and I made a vow. No one would ever use you to get to me again. So Arthur Sinclair, the billionaire, ceased to exist. I became a reclusive consultant. I built a wall of anonymity around us, around you. I thought if you lived a normal life, without the trappings of immense wealth, you would be safe. You would be free to find someone who loved you, not for your name or your money. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound regret. But in trying to protect you from one kind of predator, I left you completely defenseless against another. Elliot didn't want the Sinclair fortune because he never knew it existed. He just wanted a beautiful, gentle wife with a respectable but not intimidating family connection. He wanted someone he could control. My secrecy, my lie. It made you the perfect target for a man like him. I am so sorry, Bella. The revelation washed over Isabella, a wave of understanding and sorrow. Her father's distance, his quiet nature, his aversion to the spotlight, it wasn't a rejection of her, but a desperate, misguided attempt to protect her. He had carried this terrible secret, this burden of grief and guilt alone for all these years. She rose from her chair and walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. He was a powerful, formidable man who had just shaken the foundations of New York society. But in that moment, he was just a grieving husband and a father who feared he had failed his child. You didn't fail me, Dad, she whispered, resting her head against his. You gave me a real childhood. You gave me a chance to be a person, not a headline. And last night, you gave me back my life. He finally put his arms around her, holding his daughter and his unborn grandchild, the future of his legacy. The walls he had built for decades were finally coming down. The secret was out, and the world had changed forever. But now, for the first time, they would face it together. In the week that followed the gala, a team of the world's most formidable lawyers, all on Arthur Sinclair's payroll, descended Upon Isabella's life. They came armed with pre-prepared divorce petitions, asset seizure notices for Elliot, and a mountain of corporate documents that represented the keys to the Sinclair global kingdom. The world expected a bloodbath, a messy public divorce where the jilted wife would take her husband for every last cent. But Isabella wanted something else. She wanted closure, not just revenge. 2 weeks after that fateful night, she agreed to meet Elliot. Not in a lawyer's office, but in the vast, empty penthouse they had once shared. He was a changed man. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, haunted look. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit hung on him like a shroud. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over a city that no longer belonged to him. Isabella, he said, his voice raspy. They've taken everything. The accounts, the cars, even the club memberships. Isabella stood calmly by the door, her hand resting on her stomach. She felt no pity, only a profound sense of finality. They weren't yours to begin with, Elliot. They were all on loan from my father. He turned to face her, his eyes pleading. I know what I did was unforgivable. Chloe, the things I said. I was a fool, Bella. I was blinded by ambition. But I loved you. In the beginning, I really did. Did you? She asked, her voice clear and steady. Did you love me? Or did you love the idea of me? The perfect, quiet wife who wouldn't challenge you, who would look good on your arm and never question your authority. You didn't want a partner, Elliot. You wanted a possession. He took a step towards her. We can fix this. We have a child on the way. Your father. He did this to teach me a lesson I understand. I've learned it. Tell him I've learned my lesson. We can start over. It was then that Isabella finally understood the depth of his delusion. He still saw her as an intermediary, a conduit to her father's power. He didn't see her at all. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a single document. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a simple one-page agreement. She placed it on the marble coffee table. This is a divorce settlement, Elliot. It's already been signed by me. He scrambled to read it, his eyes scanning the page frantically. What is this? It says I keep the watch and the art in my office. Nothing else. This is a joke. It's not a joke, Isabella said calmly. You once told me I shouldn't be held back by outdated assets. I'm taking your advice. I am releasing you from our marriage. I'm not suing you. I'm not dragging you through the courts. I'm simply letting you go. My father's legal team will handle the dissolution of Vance Properties. As for me, I want nothing from you. And I am giving you nothing. You can keep your watch. He stared at her dumbfounded. He had expected a fight, screaming matches, a war. He was prepared for war. He was not prepared for this quiet, complete dismissal, to be treated as so insignificant that he wasn't even worth fighting. You're just erasing me, he whispered, the full weight of his irrelevance finally crashing down on him. No, Elliot, Isabella said, turning to leave. You were never really there to begin with. She left him in the empty penthouse, a ghost, in a life that had never truly been his. As the elevator descended, Isabella felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It was the peace of liberation. That evening, she met with her father and David Brown, the CEO of Sinclair Global, in the company's towering headquarters, a building she had passed 1,000 times without knowing it, belonged to her family. The boardroom was intimidating, all glass and steel, with a view that stretched from the Statue of Liberty to Central Park. The board is prepared to ratify your position as Chairwoman Isabella David Brown, said respectfully. Your father and I can guide you, of course. You can be as involved or as hands-off as you wish. Her father nodded. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Bella. You can set up a foundation, focus on philanthropy. The money is yours to do with as you see fit. Isabella looked out at the sprawling city, a universe of lights and possibilities. For her entire life, others had made choices for her. Her father chose secrecy to protect her. Elliot chose control to possess her. Now, for the first time, the choice was hers. No, she said, her voice resonating with a newfound strength that surprised even herself. I don't want to be a silent chairwoman, and philanthropy isn't enough. She turned to face them, her eyes clear and determined. Sinclair Global is a ruthless company, Dad. I've been reading the reports. You built an empire by being a shark. I respect what you built, but I can't be you. She took a breath. I want to be CEO, not just in name. I want to run this company. I want to change it from the inside out. We have the power to be a force for good, not just for profit. I want to invest in sustainable energy, create fair labor practices, and build a charitable foundation that's a core part of our business model, not just a tax write-off. I want to build a legacy our family, my child, can be proud of. David Brown looked stunned. Arthur Sinclair looked at his daughter, and for the first time he saw not the little girl he needed to protect, but the powerful visionary woman his wife Eleanor had always been. A slow, proud smile spread across his face. "Well then," Madam CEO Arthur said, his voice brimming with pride, "it looks like you have a board meeting to run." 1 year later, the setting was not a red carpet, but the gleaming state-of-the-art lobby of the newly opened Eleanor Sinclair Children's Hospital, the flagship project of the Sinclair Global Foundation. The air buzzed not with the sound of camera shutters, but with the genuine excitement and gratitude of doctors, patients, and city officials. At the center of it all stood Isabella Sinclair. She was no longer the timid woman hiding behind her husband. She was poised, confident, and radiant. Dressed in a sharply tailored power suit, she held her 10-month-old son, Arthur Jr., AJ, on her hip. Her son, with his bright, curious eyes, was her constant reminder of what she was building and who she was building it for. She had spent the last year in a baptism by fire, learning every facet of the vast Sinclair empire. She worked tirelessly, earning the respect of the board, not because of her name, but because of her sharp intellect, her compassion, and her unwavering vision. She had initiated sweeping changes, divesting from exploitative industries and pouring billions into green technology and ethical ventures. Profits had dipped initially, causing panic among some older shareholders, but Isabella held her ground. Now, with major new government contracts in renewable energy and a surge of positive public sentiment, Sinclair Global was more respected and more profitable than ever. Her compassionate capitalism model was becoming a case study at Harvard Business School. After delivering a powerful, heartfelt speech dedicating the hospital to the mother she'd barely known, Isabella was mingling with the guests. She moved with an easy grace, discussing pediatric oncology with the chief of surgery in one moment and cooing at her son in the next. She saw her father across the room watching her. He wasn't the grim, secretive man from her youth. The weight of his past seemed to have lifted. He was smiling, a genuine, warm smile, as he played peekaboo with his grandson. He had found a new purpose, not as a shadow king, but as a doting grandfather and a proud father. Later, as the event wound down, Isabella stood with her father on the hospital's rooftop garden, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. AJ was asleep in his stroller beside them. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Bella," Arthur said, his voice quiet. "You have her strength, her heart." "I learned from the best," Isabella replied, squeezing his hand. "From both of you." A notification pinged on her phone. It was a news alert. She glanced at it. The headline read, "Fallen mogul Elliot Vance, sentenced to 18 months for securities fraud." The article detailed how the forensic audit had uncovered years of financial crimes, a house of cards so rotten it was a miracle it had ever stood at all. He was a forgotten man, a footnote in her story. She felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a distant clinical pity. She archived the notification without a second thought and put her phone away. He was the past. She was looking at the future. She gazed out at the skyline, at the endless river of headlights and the towering buildings. A year ago, this city had been her prison. Now it was her kingdom. not a kingdom of glass and steel, but one of hope, legacy, and boundless possibility. She was not Isabella Vance, the humiliated wife, nor was she just Isabella Sinclair, the billionaire's heir. She was Isabella, a mother, a leader, a survivor. And as she looked out at the horizon, she knew with absolute certainty that her story was just beginning. The 18 months following the opening of the Elena Sinclair Children's Hospital were a period of unprecedented success and, more importantly, profound peace for Isabella. Sinclair Global, under her leadership, had become a paragon of modern corporate responsibility, its stock price soaring on the back of ethical innovation and a sterling public image. Her life had found a rhythm. She cherished early mornings with her son, AJ, whose first words and wobbly steps filled her penthouse with a joy she'd never known. Demanding but fulfilling days at the office, shaping a better world through her work. And quiet evenings with her father, who had seamlessly settled into his role as a doting grandfather. The ghosts of Elliot Vance and the red carpet had faded into a distant, almost unbelievable memory. She was no longer a story. She was the author. This newfound stability was why the first anomaly felt so jarring. It concerned a small but brilliant German engineering firm, Lichtquelle, which had developed a revolutionary solar panel technology. It was a perfect acquisition for Sinclair Global's green energy division. Isabella had personally overseen the final negotiations. The deal was all but signed. A press release was drafted. Then, 48 hours before the final signing, Lichtquelle's board called an emergency meeting. A new offer had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. An offer so astronomically high, so far beyond the company's actual valuation, that it bordered on the absurd. Lichtquelle, legally bound by their fiduciary duty to their shareholders, had no choice but to accept. In the Sinclair Global boardroom, the mood was one of baffled frustration. "Who did this?" Isabella asked, looking at the grim faces of her acquisitions team. "Which of our competitors has this much cash to burn on a vanity play?" David Brown, still her trusted COO, slid a tablet across the vast oak table. "That's the problem, Isabella. We don't know." She looked at the screen. The buyer was a freshly registered investment vehicle named Phoenix Holdings. The name sent a tiny, unpleasant shiver down her spine, a faint echo of the gala, where her life had been torn apart and rebuilt. "Trace it," she ordered. "I want to know who is behind that name. I want to know their investors, their board, everything." For a week, the best financial investigators in the world, men and women, who could find a single misplaced dollar in a labyrinth of offshore accounts, worked around the clock. They came back with nothing. Phoenix Holdings was a ghost. It was registered in a non-disclosure jurisdiction, funded by a series of bearer bonds, and layered through so many shell corporations in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Liechtenstein, that the trail went completely cold. It was a masterclass in corporate anonymity. "The technique is familiar." David Brown admitted, his expression grave. "It's the same level of obfuscation your father used to build his portfolio in the early days." The comment hung in the air. This wasn't a standard corporate rival. This was someone who knew their methods. Someone who played the same ruthless, intricate game Arthur Sinclair had once mastered. The move wasn't just about business. It felt personal. It was a message. That evening, Isabella brought the problem to her father. They sat in his study, a place that had transformed from a solitary man's refuge into AJ's favorite playroom, with priceless first editions sitting next to brightly colored building blocks. As Isabella laid out the details of the Lichtquelle acquisition and the impenetrable wall of Phoenix Holdings, She saw a flicker of something in her father's eyes she hadn't seen in years. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was a cold, chilling recognition. "Phoenix," Arthur murmured, his voice low. He walked over to his desk and keyed something into his private computer. He was silent for a long time, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. The silence stretched thick with a tension that made the hair on Isabella's arms stand up. "Dad, what is it?" He finally turned to face her, and his expression was terrifying. All the warmth was gone, replaced by the hardened visage of the ruthless titan he had once been. "It's him," Arthur said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I should have known. I should have made sure." "Him who?" Isabella pressed her heart, beginning to pound. "The man whose company I destroyed after your mother's death." Arthur said his words like chips of ice. "A man I left with nothing but his hatred. His name is Julian Croft." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Julian Croft, the name from the story, the faceless villain who had orchestrated her mother's murder. "But you said you ruined him. I thought he was gone." "I ruined his public life." Arthur corrected, his eyes dark with regret. "I took his company, his reputation, his fortune. I left him a pariah. But I let him live. I thought fading into obscurity was a crueler punishment than death. I was arrogant. I underestimated his capacity for patience, for revenge." He gestured back to the screen. "Croft was always obsessed with mythology. The story of the phoenix rising from the ashes was the symbol of his first company. He's not just back in business, Bella. He's announcing it. To me." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The absurdly high offer wasn't about acquiring a solar company. It was about showing the Sinclairs that he could. The impenetrable shell corporations weren't just for anonymity. They were a direct mockery of the Sinclair method. This wasn't a business move. It was the first move in a war. "He's been rebuilding," Arthur continued, his voice grim. "Working in the shadows, likely through black market deals and connections I dismantled years ago. He's been waiting for the right moment to strike, and we gave it to him." "What do you mean?" Isabella whispered. "My speech at the gala, your rise to CEO." "The story went global," Arthur explained, the self-loathing clear in his voice. "We put you in the spotlight, Bella. We put the Sinclair name back on the world stage. For a man like Croft, a man nursing a 20-year grudge, seeing you, Elena's daughter, thriving in the seat of my power, it must have been the ultimate provocation. He's not after the company. He's not after my money." Arthur walked over to Isabella, his hands resting on her shoulders, his eyes boring into hers. The fear she saw there was not for himself, but for her and her son. "He's after our legacy, Isabella. He's after you. And he will not stop until he has burned everything we've built back to the ground." The cozy warmth of the study felt suddenly like a tomb. The ghost that had haunted her father's past was no longer a memory. It was here, it was real, and it was coming for them. Isabella looked at the scattered toys on the floor, thought of her son sleeping peacefully in his crib upstairs, and a new feeling washed over her, eclipsing the fear. It was a cold, protective fury she recognized instantly. It was the Sinclair fury. It was the same fire that had fueled her father to build an empire, and the same resolve that had allowed her to rebuild her life. Julian Croft thought he was hunting a ghost's daughter. He was about to find out he was hunting a queen. Isabella's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the fact that our lowest moments do not have to define us. It's about trading a cage of gold for a crown of your own making. She was stripped of her dignity in front of the entire world. But in that moment of absolute humiliation, she found the path back to herself, uncovering a strength she never knew she possessed. Her journey from heartbreak on the red carpet to the head of the boardroom reminds us all that true power isn't about the name you carry or the money you inherit. It's about the choices you make when you finally have the freedom to decide your own worth. If Isabella's journey from a pawn in someone else's game to the queen of her own empire inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And for more incredible stories of resilience and triumph, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Thank you for listening.